It's the Real News Network, and I'm Greg Wilpert in Baltimore. Last week, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo suggested that to Congress that the Trump administration would not rule out going to war with Iran, even when there is no explicit authorization from Congress to do so. Pompeo said this in the context of being asked whether the 2001 authorization to use military force, or AUMF, could be used to attack Iran on the basis that Iran supported the 9/11 attacks and is connected to Qaeda, which carried out the 9/11 attack. Here's a clip of the exchange between Senator Rand Paul and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
Do you believe that the 2001 authorization to go to war with those who attacked us on 9/11 applies to Iran or Iran's Revolutionary Guard?
I'd prefer to just leave that to lawyers, Senator.
You're unwilling to state unequivocally that that the resolution in 2001 to have retribution and stop the people who attacked us, that Iran had something to do with the attacks on 9/11?
You asked a factual question and a legal question there. The legal question I will leave to counsel. The factual question with respect to Iran's connections to Al-Qaeda is very real. They have hosted Al-Qaeda. They permitted Al-Qaeda to transit their country. There's no doubt there is a connection between the Islamic Republic of Iran and Al-Qaeda.
And then on Monday, the Trump administration's decision to designate the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps as a foreign terrorist organization went into effect. This is the first time that a governmental organization has been designated as a foreign terrorist organization. Joining me now to discuss these developments with regard to U.S.-Iranian relations is Colonel Larry Wilkerson. He's a retired U.S. colonel and former Chief of Staff to Secretary of State Colin Powell. He's now a distinguished professor at the College of William and Mary. Thanks for joining us again, Larry.
Thanks for having me.
So what do you think about Pompeo's claim that Iran is connected to Al-Qaeda? Is there any basis for this claim as far as you know?
As far as I know, and my experience as well as my research over the last 15 years in academia leads me to believe this is true, there's almost no contact. There have been transits, there have been criminal transits of Iran, and Iran generally tries to block those transits, but like the United States and any other country in the world today, it's impossible to block everyone. And there have been times where Al-Qaeda might have made overtures to the Iranian government or to parts of that government, like the Quds Force or IRGC, but they've always been rebuffed. And all we had to do was watch Iran's fierce attacks on the terrorist groups in Syria and understand how Iran itself has been attacked by terrorist groups, often supported money-wise by Mohammed bin Salman from Riyadh, of course, and others like the Pakistani ISI and so forth, how Iran has responded to those attacks, fearing that its entire society will be disrupted by them, let alone the casualties that they produce. So Iran has been a receptor, if you will, of terrorist attacks, just like the United States, Europe, and other places have been. So Iran is not a sponsor of terrorism. With respect to Hezbollah, we understand why Iran backs and supports Hezbollah. It's the only weapon that the region offers to counter Israel's massive modern military arm. Iran doesn't have an arm like that. Lebanon doesn't have an arm like that. So to say that Iran sponsors terrorism of any sort, let alone Al-Qaeda, is just preposterous. The greatest state sponsor of terrorism in the region and indeed in the world is Saudi Arabia, our ally.
Now, the other notable part of this exchange between Senator Rand Paul and Secretary Pompeo was that Paul tried to get to Pompeo to talk about the 2001 AUMF. Pompeo, though, only said that he'd leave it up to the lawyers whether applying the AUMF to Iran is legal. But it's not really clear whether he means that he would wait for such a determination, that is a legal determination, after an attack on Iran, or if it would be made beforehand and perhaps prevent an attack. What do you think? Is the administration getting ready to apply the 2001 AUMF on Iran?
To me, this is, as I think it was Yogi Berra said, deja vu all over again. I'm looking at the same kind of trail, as it were, that happened just prior to the invasion of Iraq in 2003, and the same characters with a few new additions actually laying that trail down. Designation of the IRGC and the Quds Force wholesalely as a appurtenance of Iranian government as a foreign terrorist organization, and now this business of connecting Tehran with Al-Qaeda, just like George Tenet and John McLaughlin did in the CIA with Colin Powell before he gave his presentation at the UN, which we now know was a total lie. Up to this, AUMF provides authorization. All of these are building blocks, and I think the AUMF is the last building block in setting the stage for a war with Iran, for the use of military force against Iran. This is preposterous. The AUMF that was issued by the Congress post 9/11 was aimed at those who perpetrated 9/11. Risibly here, laughably here, preposterously here. Saudi Arabia provided 15 of those terrorists. The UAE, the Saudi, most staunch Saudi ally right now with MBZ in its leadership role, provided 2 or 3 of the others. So we're looking at the main element that attacked the United States on September the 11th, 2001, having come from Saudi citizenry, accompanied by UAE citizenry. And now we're looking at Iran as applicable under this AUMF. This shows how far we have come from the rule of law, from wise thinking, from decent strategy, from doing the kinds of things that the law and our national security interests would demand that we do. We are actually acting now under President Trump, and God knows if he knows what's happening, because most of this is being orchestrated by John Bolton, the national security advisor. We're operating in a way that's inimical to, injurious to U.S. national security interests, and ultimately to the interest of the long-term interest of Israel in the region. So this is, to watch this as an academic and to watch it even more so, more profoundly as a military professional, is really jarring. This is truly stupid.
So how serious do you see the preparations, that is, in terms of the likelihood that the U.S. would attack Iran sometime before the 2020 presidential election, given that all of this groundwork is being laid with the terrorism designation for Iran's Revolutionary Guard and the claim of connections between Iran and Al-Qaeda? I mean, wouldn't something else have to happen in order for an attack to happen, or is this good enough?
Not necessarily with this administration. I would have thought the same thing in January of 2003, and then 2-3 months later, we were at war with Iraq, one of the most catastrophic strategic decisions the United States has ever made. I take your point, though, that maybe there are some people out there, and even more so, more important, there are people in the Congress who realize that the same set of circumstances is unfolding with many of the same players yet again. I have to cross my fingers and hope that what's happening here, even though I don't think John Bolton and those like him want this, they actually want force to be used and the regime to be unseated. But I think what is happening, at least in Trump's mind, is that, and after all, he's the president, is that what we're doing is bringing maximum leverage on Tehran. So that's why you have this argument right now between Pompeo and his people on the one hand, and Bolton and his people on the other, as to whether or not to tighten the sanctions to the point of 0. That is to say, to keep Iran from selling any oil, even under the waivers that Trump has been granting to countries like China and India. Kill those waivers, Bolton and his people say. Kill them. Don't let Iran sell a single barrel of oil. That way we'll choke them. The regime will fall, or it'll be easy to beat militarily. Now, on the other hand, Pompeo and his team are saying, don't do that, because we don't want to take it to that point. So we've got that battle going on within the administration. But I think what this shows is that President Trump wants the tension, the pressure on Iran to bring Iran back to the negotiating table so he can claim just prior to the 2020 elections that he's done the impossible. He's brought Iran back to the table and we're negotiating again, and that the deal he will produce will be much better than the deal President Obama produced under the JCPOA. I'm crossing my fingers and hoping that that's the case, and that at the end of the day, if none of this happens, that we won't go to war. But I can't bet on that, because the president has the most mercurial temperament I've ever seen of anyone at this level of power, and so anything's possible.
One last point, though. I mean, don't you think that the role of the Europeans would play a role? I mean, would be important here because, I mean, after all, they're opposed to breaking up the JCPOA, the agreement on the nuclear energy for Iran. And when we went up to the Iraq war, they were actually instrumental in participating. The Bush administration at the time, at least some countries were, whereas now it seems like the U.S. has no allies in its effort to oust the Iranian government. So don't you think that that might still be a factor in holding the U.S. back from war?
It should be, and normally and naturally it would be. But remember, even with my administration, George W. Bush, we had a coalition of the willing, as Donald Rumsfeld called it, and that coalition only included substantially the United Kingdom. Germany was vehemently opposed. Chirac and Dominique de Villepin, the foreign minister of France, were just as vehemently opposed. So that didn't stop George Bush. And I don't think this administration, given its policy towards the Europeans to this point, which has been just, well, not disastrous, and its policy in particular towards the most powerful member of Europe, Germany, I don't think it would stop this administration for a moment. And I know for darn sure it wouldn't stop John Bolton. John Bolton doesn't think allies are even necessary, doesn't want allies. So I take your point, but I don't think that would impede this administration. I still fall back on my original hope that what Trump is after here is the same thing he was after with Kim Jong-un. Call him Rocket Man, threaten him, tell him that you're going to destroy him, your button's bigger than his button, and all that kind of stuff, and then negotiate with him. I think that's what Trump wants to do with Iran, too. Don't think it's going to happen because the Iranians are not going to come back to the negotiating table. But I think that's what he wants.
All right. Okay, well, we're going to leave it there for now. I'm speaking to Colonel Larry Wilkerson, professor at the College of William and Mary. Thanks again, Larry, for having joined us today.
Thanks. Take care.
And thank you for joining the Real News Network.